Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and I am coming to you live on the FTN Network to break down the college basketball DFS slate, specifically the 9-gamer that will be taking place on DraftKings tomorrow. We're going to break down each game, talk a little bit about PrizePicks and any applicable props or betting information, while also providing you with the core. Still dealing with sickness throughout the Waddell household, so again, had to start a little bit later this evening. I apologize for that, but we are still going to be coming at you with these shows as scheduled each and every day that we need to have them. So here we are. We'll be back on Thursday night to cover this college football bowl game slate, Friday night to cover Saturday college hoops, and then again Saturday morning to kind of reset and talk about how crazy the bowl games are actually going to be with all this transfer portal madness, guys out. You know, it's just going to be total chaos for the most part. If you're watching live or on demand, I appreciate it and would like to thank you very much. Please support us with a like. Interact with us throughout the show or in the comment section on demand, and please share throughout all of social media. We do appreciate it and very, very humble to see that you guys continue to support this show. Thank you very much. Love it. Let's get right into it and start getting through this slate. It was a little bit of a weird one tonight. Hit on some plays, just the whole paying up, there was value available, but the whole paying up and then values lineups just doesn't sit with me that well. Still want to play values, but there's just such a great strategy with going semi-balanced, and we saw it again tonight. Could have ran two guys from the UT Martin squad that were under 7.5, avoiding the payups. I know Filipkowski went off, but there's just so much to like for this mid-range heavy lineups, and this slate here, the 9-gamer in particular, has a lot of solid options as well. It's very low to mid-major heavy, so it's definitely going to be a good one. We should see relatively spread out ownership for the most part, except for a handful of maybe less or more obvious spots that will create a higher ownership, like we saw with a guy like Jack Collins tonight on Monmouth. All right, so the 9-gamer contest-wise, there's a 2K to first GBP, a bunch of saddies for the Mania, and then your daily allotment of single entry and large field GBPs. I am going to be starting with my exposures list starting on the Thursday slate. So that will be a separate sheet from the article where I list out my specific exposures and also will start rolling out some minutes projections here soon as well. So lots of fun stuff happening, and that will finally be taking place now that we have about a month and a half under our belts. All right, let's get right into it. First game on the slate. There's a lot of interesting matchups here. This one, not as interesting, and I think that we're going to want to find that targeting against FAU is really probably not the move. Florida Atlantic taking on Florida International. This is one that really has blowout written all over it. We went through a lot of games today that were projected blowouts. Florida Atlantic 23-point favorites, total of 154, so relatively high, all things considering. When it comes to FAU, the primary things to consider is that, yes, Elijah Martin and Janelle Davis are the two primary options and alphas on this team, at least on the perimeter. but they're very rarely main team looks because they do tend to take turns with their production. One game will be a massive Elijah Martin, performance. Then the next game we'll see John L. Davis pour it in, and they're both just priced to the point where they're nothing more than GP looks because of that. Davis at 8-4 and FIU defensively, this is a team, anytime they're on the slate, we certainly want to look to target against them. They do not have a very good defense. You can go back to the Tarleton State game early in November in which they gave up just that slate-breaking massive performance and 82 overall points to Tarleton State. Of course, Corey Smith had 34 real points, 8 rebounds, 6 steals, just like a massive, massive explosion. And they've consistently given up big game after big game. So this is a spot where it makes a lot of sense to target him, but he is mostly, for my money, a GP look at that price. And then at 7-7, the same thing for Martin. I just feel like we can spend our money maybe a little bit wiser or go to some options who we know are going to dominate the touches more. This is an unselfish team, and they just want to win. That's great for real basketball. For DFS purpose, it's a little bit difficult to justify. I do think Vladislav Golden is a nice upper-level GPP look at 7-8 as well. That's a high price to pay, knowing he's not going to play more than 20 to 22 minutes. Foul trouble usually hits him, but even when he's not in foul trouble, we don't typically see him play much more. They tend to manage his minutes, and he ends up playing, a very capped amount of playing time. We'll see him start to be unleashed as we get closer to March. So I think you probably don't want to use him in your main lineup either. They're really looking to use Giancarlo Rosado in tandem or in addition to. We saw a couple of big games out of him recently, but he is also playing roughly 12 to 18 minutes, relatively capped, taking those minutes or that water break time from Vladislav Golden. We would have Jalen Gaffney, who had been a very solid value most of last year, but his upper tier production finally, after years of toiling away at UConn and being just a role player, he's finally starting to put together production that is consistent, and that has created a situation in which his salary has reached $5.6K. He's okay there, but obviously not a primary look. Brian Greenlee at 4.8. We like him because he plays 25 to 30 minutes, sub 5K. That will work. And then Brandon Weatherspoon, who's sitting there at 4.4, another guy getting over 20 minutes. Less consistent, does have pop, 4.4, just what the doctor ordered against FIU. He's very much in play. I have no problems going there in any format if you need that salary savings and you want to get exposure to this team without breaking the bank. On the FIU side, it's going to be pretty lean. There's a lot of red on their Ken Palm page. They are going to find life difficult. Ken Palm has an 87 to 65 in favor of FAU. They have had some really rough outings. Doors blown off against Tarleton State, UCF. They actually played Miami tough somehow, some way. Got beat close by a mediocre Marshall team, beat Kennesaw State, and recently beat up on LIU. So they have a squad capable of putting up points, stats, and some higher usage guys. But I just have this rule developing that I don't want to target against FAU too often. And I think that you're going to find it's not a winning proposition too often to do so. They do have a legitimate slate-breaking weapon in Arturo Dean, who is 7'6". He has had a couple of 50-plus performances in the recent games against Florida Gulf Coast and LIU. He's not going to put up 50 against FAU. I think we can all pretty much agree with that. Rates-wise, he's phenomenal. 30% usage rate, 30% shot rate, 36% assist rate, and his steal rate of 8.5% is number one in all of college basketball while shooting 39% from long range. So he does a lot of good things for this team, but I do not see him having much success against this Florida Atlantic team. Other options who are at least on the upper usage standpoint, Jaden Brewer, who's there at 5'4". His overall stats for the season, not great, but in their recent 2 games, he's seen a spike in minutes And it has created a situation in which he has become an intriguing GPP look at 5-4 if we think those minutes will continue. 25 fantasy points and 28. He actually has a usage rate of 25%, a shot rate of 26%, and an offensive rebounding rate of 8.5%. So he's somebody that could be worth a shot there at 5-4. That's kind of the new value price there with this DK dynamic pricing. He's not a starter, so you are kind of playing with fire there. But if we think FIU completely gets dominated, there is an opportunity for Brewer to see some additional time there once the game's out of hand in the garbage time period. He has taken 21 shots over those last 2 games as well. Javonte Hawkins, 25% shot rate, shooting almost 40% from long range. Priced at a affordable 3.7K. He has played over 20 minutes in 3 straight games. This is a value, but that is doable. FIU has been a team that, at least in blowouts so far this season, they've gone with a relatively deep rotation, where we've seen 9, 10, sometimes 11 guys play double-digit minutes. This has led to FIU's starters, which was Arturo Dean, Deshaun Gittins, Seth Pinckey, and Dante Wilcox, as well as Peter Kripalbrich, all these tough names, to play less minutes than what you would ordinarily see in a more competitive game. Dean's minutes are probably safe, right? We're seeing a spike in Brewer and Hawkins, but those other starters in the rotation are seeing some very inconsistent minutes that are just kind of going up and down, and makes it very difficult to use them. Someone like Deshaun Gittins, who flashed against Kennesaw State, almost scoring 30 fantasy points, but has followed that up by putting up sub 10 fantasy points in back-to-back games. So it's a tough team to really trust here, more of a GPP look, but I do see some reasons to play Hawkins at 3.7. Seth Pinckney, who's 3.7. Also, I foresee him getting into major foul trouble dealing with this FAU front court. So if you are looking for an FIU value, I would not probably look to use him. Next game on the slate, we have Mississippi State versus Murray State. This one has the potential to be very fun. 16.5 point favorites for Mississippi State. It's 136.5 total. Another non-con. We're getting to the end of the non-con where we're dealing with some blowout situations which are affecting minutes. Mississippi State top 3 in defensive efficiency, top 100 in offensive efficiency, coming off a spanking of Tulane. Under Chris Jans, this Mississippi State team is always going to compete. Ken Pom has it 76-61 in favor of the Bulldogs. The starting crew for this team generally going to be Cam Matthews, Shaquille Moore, Deshaun Davis, Jimmy Bell, and DJ Jeffries, till we see Tolo Smith come back. There is a bunch of bench guys such as Kashawn Murphy, Andrew Taylor, Sean Jones, Jaquan Scott, even Trey Fort, who was hot to start the season, who are in the rotation and getting minutes, but they're kind of cannibalizing each other. There's really only one Mississippi State guy that I find to be all that intriguing from a main team perspective, and that's, of course, our guy, the freshman, dynamo, Josh Hubbard, sitting there at 6'2". Really, really fun player, going to be an absolute stud on this team. Huge rates from a usage perspective, 27.2% usage rate, 33.5% shot rate, shooting 42% from long range, drawing almost 5 fouls per 40. Would love to see him get into the starting rotation, but he's safe either way. You see 27 minutes in their last game, 30 against Georgia Tech, 21, 31, 23, 22, safely playing over 20 minutes and absolutely chucking. Go back to that first day that we used him to start the season against ASU, 3.8K. I know he only played 12 minutes, but you could see that there was upside there. He took 6 shots. People were kind of like, I don't know about this guy. And then ever since the second game against Tennessee Martin, he's just been absolutely killing it. The 6.2 price might feel like it's a bit high, and I get that, but he is just playing really, really well. And somebody that I think, in this particular matchup probably takes 15 plus shots off the bench. So you have to consider him. One of the few times you can look at a bench player and consider him a main team viable or possibly even a core play. Jimmy Bell has played exceptionally well this season. He has the feel of a non-con hero, so 7K is probably not in the cards here. Looking at the actual efficiency stats for the Murray State Racers, they do not have a very good defense, 282nd in defensive efficiency, and they're not particularly great on the glass either. One of the worst adjusted offensive rebounding teams in the country. So I do think there's a path for Bell to succeed here, but pricing is certainly a bit high there, and it's a little bit disadvantaged to use him, I think. On the Murray State side, you can definitely target against Mississippi State to a degree. I don't think they're a full fade whenever they're on the slate, but you are dealing with one of the elite defenses, at least early in the season. They're exceptionally good at defending the three as well, which Murray State has struggled to do so far this season under Steve Prohm. Their top player is Rob Perry, 26% usage rate, 30% shot rate, only shooting 25% from long range. As you can imagine, he's a little bit high at 6'9" for this matchup, but at least he's going to be chucking. We haven't necessarily seen the big-time upside from Perry that he flashed in years past, especially last year, but at least there is a path for him to succeed and possibly go into a mano-a-mano shot-for-shot with Josh Hubbard, but it is a lot of money to pay at 6'9". The rest of the starting five for Murray State is as follows. Jacoby Wood, Brian Moore, Sean Walker, and Nick Ellington. Off the bench, one of their primary guys is Quincy Anderson. There is viability, or there is some potential usage here for Quincy Anderson as a sub 5K price. He is playing a ton of minutes off the bench. Gonna be relatively tough for him to be successful on the glass in this matchup, but sub 5K, there is a value there and a path for him to do well. Ellington at 7.3, that's probably priced out. Jacoby Wood at 7.1, same thing. Just not really a great spot to be paying up these prices for these Murray State Racer guys. All right, UTSA versus Little Rock. This is one that I'm liking this matchup. I think this could be really a pretty fun game, and one that we're certainly want to be involved in. There are a few, like the Arkansas State Louisville game, that are also looking like they're going to be pretty fun. Total on this one, 163. Little Rock, 6.5 point favorites. I like the UTSA side here. In my dynasty, one of my biggest dynasty leagues, there has been a run on UTSA players recently. Now, defensively, under Steve Henson, they do not do a very good job. He's been there forever, since 2017, which doesn't feel like forever, but it's actually, over 6 years on the court there. Has not had a lot of success this year, although they have won 3 games in a row. 340th in defensive efficiency for this team. They're not a great three-point shooting team. They have a lot of holes. However, they do have an intriguing starting lineup that can contribute at a DFS and fantasy perspective. It starts with Christian Tucker, one of their primary guards, who has a extremely high assist rate and is starting to score more this season and has become a de facto leader. They also start Isaiah Wyatt, Dre Fuller, who you may remember from his time at UCF, spent a couple of seasons there as a kind of role player, jump shooter, Trey Edmonds, and Adante Holoman. They do bring off the 7-footer Carlton Lingard off the bench most of the time. However, he did start for the first 4 games of the season, and he did start against Arkansas Fort Smith, the non-D1. However, there has been a couple of games in between where he doesn't start. He's still somewhat viable even if he doesn't, because he is a quality 7-footer, has experience in the high major level, spent a season or 2 at Kansas State. Wasn't a particularly big minute player there, but does have that experience, and of course has the pedigree to be a high major player. And at 7 foot, my good friend Johnny used to say, you can't teach height, Walt. The rates for these guys are as follows. Christian Tucker, 22% usage rate, 36% assist rate, top 40 in the country. He's a really fun player to watch. If you haven't had a chance to watch him yet, I would encourage you to stream this game. Dre Fuller, 26% shot rate. Adante Holman, 24% shot rate. Isaiah Wyatt, shooting 40% from long range. Carlton Lingard, 11.2% offensive rebounding rate. Looking at the prices, they are fair. I don't think we have any super advantageous spots to really look here and say, man, these prices are extraordinarily low by any means. I think Tucker makes a ton of sense at 6'6" and fits that mold of a, semi-balanced type of play. This is one that to me might go a little under the radar, although we did see some pretty heavy ownership today on the UT Martin kids, Cruz and Sears, because of that higher total and because of the pace played. We could see, due to the higher total, some of these UTSA guys get actual ownership. Tucker, to me, is one of the better options just because of his strong peripheral involvement, and he's starting to score more as well. Isaiah Wyatt comes with guard forward eligibility. He has been really good the past couple of games. There isn't a ton of consistency there throughout, so he's playing really well right now, but I do feel like the wheels could fall off at any time. This is a matchup he could do well in, but I would rather stick with a more consistent option that has less ebbs and flows, less spikes and torpedoes. So I am still leaning Tucker over Wyatt there. And then Dre Fuller, who's there at 7.5, very, reliant on his scoring in the past, has shown himself to be a pretty strong rebounder for this Roadrunners team. He's definitely a GPP type of look, but 7.5s, it's a bit restrictive. I'd rather just save the almost 1K and go to Tucker because they're probably going to score very similar at the end of the day overall with their stat lines. Lingard at 6'1", it'd almost be worth him not starting so the masses don't use him. You see in the minutes that he is playing, low to mid 20s, he's been very effective, high fantasy point per minute type of player. Again, has that high major experience and playing quite well. Believe they're still waiting for a waiver on Jordan Ivy Curry, who transferred away last year and decided to come back. Having him would be a big boost with this team, the way that they play for years with our guy, Javon Jackson. They just play a style under Steve Henson that is conducive to fantasy, whether that's, Ivy Curry in the past before he transferred out, Jacob Germany, Javon Jackson, Keaton Wallace. There's just been a ton of really good players that have come through this program, and they play a great way. So you want to definitely have exposure here. Adante Holman, the sophomore, is dealing with a injury, so there is a questionable label on him. You want to be careful with some of these DK labels, by the way. They had a ton of guys on tonight's slate, especially for Coppin State, that were out, but they weren't actually out. And I made that comment last night. I don't think there's an injury designation here. And then several who were out but didn't have tags, which we obviously like that because it creates an edge. But I do want to make people be aware that some of the injury tags on some of these low to mid-major teams have been off. So don't only rely on those for those tags. But it is true, Holloman is going to be questionable here. Trey Edmonds at 5.5 makes some sense. Would likely see some additional minutes there depending on how that injury situation shake out. I would rather just keep my exposure to the top four there, with Tucker being a priority and Lingard being a nice secondary option that I have no issues using. Let's see here. So the book on Arkansas Little Rock, 330th in defensive efficiency. So this is an Ohio Valley team that also isn't going to do much in the defensive side of things. They play at the 87th fastest tempo. UTSA plays at the 50th fastest tempo. So we're almost having a rerun in a way of tonight's UT Martin NC State game. Obviously, neither of these teams playing are as quality as NC State, but we're going to see a game with a lot of possessions and a ton of fantasy goodness. So we want exposure across the board. When it comes to Little Rock, they have a kid by the name of KK Robinson who did spend time at Arkansas, did spend time at Texas A&M, didn't work out in the SEC. So he comes to Little Rock where in his first 5 games, he had been absolutely detonating. He does have injury designations. Unfortunately, I really would have loved to have used him. The only reason I'm really talking about him is just because it's such a clearly great spot for him. Has SEC talent. Is priced at 3K there. I don't think he even has. I don't know if he has an injury designation on DK. It doesn't appear to. But he's one of those Arkansas transfers over the last couple of years. There's another one on this slate, and Darian Ford as well, that are tearing it up in the lower tier conferences. And that just goes to show you the transfer portal for mid-major teams and low-major teams is still going to be able to work quite well for them as well. I do not expect KK Robinson in this game. I don't think he'll be back anytime soon from what it sounds like. I would certainly love to see him play. Obviously, his rates across the board are incredible for this Little Rock team, but it does sound like he's going to be out for at least a few more games. So we'll see what happens there. If it comes out to where he's available or even starting, obviously we would want to play him in every single lineup at 3K, but I don't think we're going to have that option. The starting five that Little Rock has ran with in his absence is Jameer Chaplin, who is another transfer you may remember from his time at South Florida as a role player there the last couple of years. He's playing quite well. Jalen Crocker Johnson, who is a freshman. Bradley Douglas, Jordan Jefferson, and Deontay Gordon, who spent a season with Wichita State, an uneventful season, but now he's playing for Little Rock over the last couple of years and contributing at a fairly decent level. Prices on the starters are relatively high. Like Jameer Chaplin at 8.8 was just, that's tough. Chaplin at South Florida was always sub 5K. He's obviously taken on a alpha role for this team, especially with KK on the sidelines, playing heavy minutes and taking a ton of shots. So I get why he's priced that high, but it's a big time sticker shock. His overall usage and shot rates just coming in at 19%. He has a offensive rebounding rate 11%, shooting 48% from long range, and has a block rate of 3%. But he's just, I don't know if we can pay that price for him. Although, again, high pace matchup, a lot of points, two bad defenses. It does make sense, but I'm really antsy and leery about using guys at the 8.5 or higher price tag right now. Even when we have value, I just am a little antsy about sucking in that salary where we could potentially get another couple of, 6 or 7K guys in there that just pack out the rest of our lineups. We do have Bradley Douglas at 8.1. That is going to be really tough. Another guy with a lot of upside. I think we're looking at a GPP situation because of these prices for most of these guys. 7.4 for Crocker Johnson, who has been detonating over his last two games. I mean, geez, this is really, really difficult. Deontay Gordon at 6.9, I think, comes forward to eligibility. He's the most likely main team candidate that we can justify playing. You see rates-wise, 23% shot rate, 22% usage rate, has a offensive rebounding rate over 8%, block rate 3.5%, shooting about 30% from long range. Only 10 attempts, but he's taking just enough to kind of be dangerous out there. And we saw a game against Arkansas State, 14 points, 15 rebounds. He has been really, really solid, starting every single game this season. And his minutes, except for the last two, Central Arkansas, there was some early foul trouble, and then he played most of the second half. And then against Winthrop, he saw early foul trouble as well, which cost him a lot of the first half. Ended up playing 21 minutes. They did get blown out by Winthrop in the end. But I would expect him in this type of game, this environment, to play over 30 minutes once more. So he is the guy that I'm looking at there, just a steep discount compared to Douglas and Chaplin. And I don't know that Chaplin or Douglas are necessarily that much better than Gordon. In fact, I know they aren't. So let's take that discount. Let's ride with him. He makes all the sense in the world at that price. Even Cougar Downing, who has a cool name, right, at 7K. He's been solid. Not a price that I think we're going to be able to get to. It just seems really, really juiced up here. Downing is not a starter either. He's coming off the bench, playing starter minutes off the bench. That can sometimes be tricky. But, if he was 5K or something, then we're getting a little bit of a sneakier look. But he's just chucking, taking a ton of shots, has a shot rate well over 24%. But we'll have to do some real thinking about how we want construction to go and how we're going to be able to fit in some of these pieces. This game is a great GBP type of stack because a lot of these guys, I think, will end up being on the lower owned side, Douglas especially. And they've obviously shown upside. So you want to rotate through those in your MME builds, definitely do that. UNC Asheville versus Auburn. We have an Auburn sighting here. They've been a frustrating team, right? They've been up and down. They are 19.5 point favorites against Asheville, 148.5 over under. Asheville starts with their stud who almost surprisingly decided to come back for another year, but I'm talking about Drew Pember, of course. Fourth highest usage rate in the country, top 40 in shot rate, shooting 42% from long range, has an assist rate of 30%, top 3 fouls drawn rate. He does a great job. He absolutely cooks left and right. Usually a starter. He had a couple of games after missing the Wofford contest in which he came off the bench for 22 minutes against Western Kentucky and 34 minutes against Kennesaw State, which was an overtime game. Did get back to starting in their last contest, which was just a few days ago against Western Carolina, in which they lost, but he did play 32 minutes in that role. One thing about Drew Pember that has been true of him for the last 3 years at least is that you want to use him when they're on the slate against a equal or lesser opponent. When Asheville ends up on the slate and they're playing what I would consider to be tier A, tier B, high major program, he has been a fade. And I know it's going to be tough because some people they look at his logs and they're like, wow, we got to roll this guy. He's just so phenomenal. Does everything, block shots, gets rebounds, assists, scores in bunches. But he has struggled mightily against upper tier competition time and time again. You go back to the beginning of the season when they played Michigan, and we didn't know Michigan was going to be this bad yet. Michigan beat them 99-74. Pember just played 21 minutes, did have 19 points, just 3 rebounds. He had one of his worst games of the season, which was still a high floor, 25 fantasy points. Like, he's torpedoing your lineup, sure, at this price, but at least, he's not having a true rock bottom game where he puts up a 10 or something. But at 9-2, you really can't afford to take a sub 30 fantasy point game. So be advised about Pember. I know it's looks great because of his logs and how he plays and how effective he usually is, but he is one of those guys that just really struggles against these upper tier teams. And Auburn has a lot of leaks. Defensively, they have holes. They can be scored on. But Pember just, I don't know what it is, clams up, or they tended to shut him down or contain him to a degree. The other Asheville relevant players, Josh Banks, Fletcher Abey, Caleb Burgess, and Nick McMullen. We've seen Jamon Battle and Trent Stephanie come off the bench. I don't have a lot of love for any of them. Asheville's playing at a slow pace. They're a middling defense. They're going to be going up against Auburn and have the opportunity to, do some things in garbage time and get a boost in tempo. But overall, I don't see a lot to like here. Fletcher Abey is only 4-4, so you do have a value look there and a guy playing over 30 minutes. I could see and would be okay using him as a main team value play. I would imagine with the way that these slates have gone and the way people kind of just go right to it, they scroll down and try to see any cheapies that are averaging a certain fantasy point per minute or fantasy point per game number, and then going through their logs. So AB will be somebody that people look at there and possibly makes a lot of sense compared to somebody like Caleb Burgess, who's playing relatively similar minutes, but not producing even as well as AB, but also he's 5'7". On the Auburn side, we know it's super frustrating. The way that Bruce Pearl coaches and his rotations is just never going to change. He's going to play a majority of his guys, 15 to 25 minutes, and the 30 minutes, it's not going to happen. Janai Broom's price has dropped $1K after a very mediocre appearance against Indiana. Auburn completely obliterated Indiana. Now, Broome played just 21 minutes, only 22 fantasy points, but the good news is he only scored 2 points, and he still was over 20 fantasy points. So you know he has real slate-breaking capabilities at this price tag, and it's been a long time. We had to go into early last year to see him at a price this low. The main concern with Broome is always going to be he doesn't play over 30 minutes. He really deserves those minutes, but he does not get those minutes. Asheville, rebounding-wise, they're terrible. 324th in defensive rebounding, 192nd in offensive rebounding. So there's a path here for our guy Broome to absolutely crush. And at 8-3, he crosses over from the pay-up category for me at least, because that kind of starts at 8-5, 8-6, and into upper, sounds like poor grammar, but upper mid-range at 8-3. So he's very much in play in this spot. If you feel that he gets, 25 to 28 minutes instead of 19 to 21, depends on what the blowout's going to look like or how fast this game blows out. He is probably better suited as a GBP play typically, but this is a lower price where he has to be considered, no doubt about it. Still the usage leader on this team at 33%, still has the highest shot rate at 32%, has a combined rebounding rate of 40%, block rate of 6%, an assist rate of 19%. We like those quarterback in type of front court players that, they get in that triple threat position, shoot, pass, hit the deck. He can do a little bit of everything, has a fouls drawn rate of 8, does have a high fouls called rate. That is just something you have to deal with Broome. I would say he's not a core lock smash play. I know a lot of people would say that he is, but he's very high on my priority list, most definitely. Jalen Williams at 7-2, just coming off a 50, 7 assists, 6 rebounds, 24 points, probably the best game of Jalen Williams' career. Don't expect him to put that up again. He's very erratic, 7-2. He's good, but, it's just a bit high for me on him. Now, the rotation is going to remain on the perimeter and the wing. That means KD Johnson, Chaney Johnson, Denver Jones, Aiden Holloway, Chad Baker, and Trey Donaldson are going to cannibalize each other. Now, we were pretty heavy over the weekend on Trey Donaldson, and he came through at 4-5, 10.7 rebounds, 3 assists. Just played the 18 minutes. The main thing holding us back from totally unleashing Trey Donaldson is the rotation and his minutes, plateauing and probably being 20 max. So the 5-2 price increase definitely hurts. Had he come into this game still toiling around in the 4K, 4-5 range, I think we'd see a big spike in ownership. But 5-2 is enough to give us pause because he can still do a lot of damage to our lineups at that price. He does have a usage rate over 20%. He has knocked down 45% of his triples, and he has an assist rate that's top 40 in the country right now at 35%. Donaldson's ready, man. As the sophomore, he has endless upside, and he is ready to be turned loose. I wish Bruce Pearl would do the right thing, stick him in the starting lineup, and let the kid play 30 minutes. We saw a bit more of KD Johnson last game than we've seen recently. Played 19 minutes against Indiana, and he was on the floor a lot in the second half. But it was also out of reach for Indiana, and they started to play guys like him. So trend carefully with KD Johnson at 3.8. I know people will look at it and be like, wow, he scored over 20. It's time to use him again. Just be advised that he could easily play 9 minutes. He could easily play 12. I know the price is right on KD, but it's far from a foregone conclusion that he's going to get those minutes. We also saw Chaney Johnson played, and case in point, Chaney Johnson played 7 against Indiana. Before that, 18, 19, and 17. And he had a 25 fantasy point game wedged in there a week or two ago. So, and he's only 3-9. And it could very easily be him that gets 20 minutes this game, not KD Johnson. And I really harped on this last time Auburn was on the slate. But I did draw a line in the sand and say Donaldson is somebody that I really like. Denver Jones just has not worked out the FIU transfer. He has been way less satisfactory than expected. Reminds me a lot of Tyreek Key when he came over from Indiana State, joined Tennessee, A lot of people expected him to put up his big scoring numbers like he did for the Sycamores, and that just didn't happen. He had a few spike games, but it just didn't happen. It's not happening for Denver Jones, and his minutes are he's mired in inconsistent minutes right now, even though he gets starts. Aiden Holloway, 5'6". I think he's the most likely to see ownership from this Auburn team outside of Janai Broome. He's at least seeing those consistent above 20 minutes. Not much more than 20 minutes, but he's seeing it. Had a nice number against Indiana, starting to get a little more comfortable. Has a shot rate starting to balloon up there. It's now 27.7%. He has a 39% make rate from long range, an assist rate of 25%. Like, this backcourt needs to be Aiden Holloway and Trey Donaldson. It's young, I get it, but why? Why wouldn't Holloway and Donaldson be playing 30 to 35 minutes a night? Like, I get he's got these other options that he wants to play and give teams a look, different, options. But Jesus, a starting five of Donaldson, Holloway, Chad Baker, Jalen Williams, and Janai Broome, like, that has the potential to be real nasty. And we need to see that. Speaking of Chad Baker, 5'9", guard forward eligibility, also a player stuck in that 18 to 25-minute range. He showed some real flash, but I would rather take Aiden Holloway over him or Trey Donaldson, and, of course, Janai Broome. So that is the Auburn game. Very much so a GBP stack. Ken Palm has it 82 to 64 in favor of Auburn. I do not see Asheville keeping up in this game, maybe in the first half, but I do see Auburn pulling away, which does give me that pause on Broome, who will be sitting in the blowout late. Trey Donaldson is still, I think, borderline main team play viable for me in this spot as well, because he'll be getting garbage time at least. Next game on the slate, Arkansas State versus Louisville. This one is definitely a spot where I love the Red Wolves. They're +4 against the Ville. It's 147.5 over under. Louisville is a absolute dumpster fire. We know it. We have another Arkansas transfer here in Darian Ford that we can certainly look at. His price did not adjust very much at all. Now, you'll remember at a couple of slates ago against Alabama, he was there, got the start, played 36 minutes, and really was sub 20% owned. He came through in a big way for us. 23 fantasy points in those 36 minutes, took 11 shots. Now, against UAB, they had UAB is such a weird team. Like, I don't understand UAB at all. They have a great coach in Andy Kennedy. They have a great guard in Eric Gaines and a myriad of talent there, but they just can't beat anybody. And they got whooped 87-68 by what's turning out to be a really good-looking Arkansas State team. As good as a 3-7 club can look. But you have to look at who they played: Wisconsin, Iowa, Alabama. They've had a pretty tough non-con. I think in the Sun Belt schedule, this Red Wolves team is going to be really, really good. Darian Ford doesn't have the eye-catching rates that some of the other guys in his range might, but 5K, and he started 3 games in a row. I would suspect he starts again. The minutes that he lost in the UAB blowout, I believe, looking at it and kind of poking around a little bit, it seemed to indicate that was blowout. The reason for that was blowout. So expect his minutes to go up further. Other starters such as Freddie Hicks did not get very many minutes. Taron Todd, who has started in certain games, like the Alabama game, he started and played 37, came off the bench there against UAB, but still only played 22 minutes. And Todd has kind of rotated in and out of the starting lineup. You may remember last time Arkansas State was on the slate against Bama, we mentioned that they do mess around with their starters a little bit, which makes it kind of difficult to forecast, which is why I kind of just lean towards Darian Ford. Even if Ford weren't to start, I still feel pretty confident for him in this matchup against a bad Louisville team. And I think he's relatively safe. The kid has the SEC pedigree. It just obviously didn't work out there, and he's going to be very good for this team. You do have Caleb Fields there at 4'9" as a consistent starter. Played 33 minutes against UAB. Ineffective against Little Rock, which is why he barely played. That will scare some people off. He is a viable value option. Does not have the upside of somebody like Darian Ford. Fields is he's been around for a long time. for this Arkansas State team. Has a high assist rate, shoots 46% from long range, but he has a very low shot rate. And there's just times where he defers a lot, and he will rack up assists, but he can still really hurt your lineup at this 4.9 price. Even though I think this matchup holds, and he has a chance to play very well. Other starters include DeAndre Dominguez. We mentioned him before. He's the UMass transfer. Shot rate over 22%, shooting 33% from long range, combined rebounding rate over 30%. And then Isaiah Nelson, who is in his second year with the team, has started the last 2 games after hardly playing off the bench for most of the season. He had a spot start against Wisconsin and Iowa, barely played in those games, and now he has played 26 plus minutes in 3 straight. He's priced at 6.2. I would not recommend playing him there. I know he's coming off a big-time performance against UAB, but that seems a little bit reckless to pay that price for him. Freddie Hicks, who's been in and out of the starting lineup, he's there at 6.5. Feels a little bit too high for him. And same thing with Taron Todd. If he's not starting, I don't know that you could ever pay the 6.7 price for him. So I'm really just looking at Darian Ford and circling him, or going up to DeAndre Dominguez for GPPs, especially in the jam, and saying, yeah, let's ride with this guy because he has shown big time upside, and this is an opponent in which he can do quite well. And he didn't back down against Alabama. He had a great game against UAB. He performed admirably against Wisconsin, over 20 fantasy points there, and over 20 fantasy points against Iowa. Obviously, we need more than that at 7.5, but he's shown himself to be pretty consistent. And this is a Louisville team that obviously can be had by anyone. Louisville's, defensive efficiency is middling. They don't rebound particularly well. They don't shoot particularly well. There's just a lot to like for this Arkansas State team. So I will be taking that +4. Ken Palm has it 77-72 in favor of the Cards. Kenny Payne's circus here. Louisville had a game against DePaul recently. They lost 68-75. That's a tough spot. Would have been a great matchup for Brandon Huntley Hatfield, who did foul out in 27 minutes, did not perform. This is why you rarely can use Huntley Hatfield. A matchup technically against Arkansas State that he should do well in, but he's priced up to 6.6. And are we really trusting BHH? Probably not. Trey White at 6.6 has GPP merit. He's been a relatively safe look, developing player for this Cardinals program in his second year after transferring over from USC. I do like him to a degree there. He fits what we like to do as a balanced lineup for sure. Sky Clark's there at 6.3. Took 17 shots against DePaul, 12 before that, 13, 15. So getting a high number of shots. Clark is playing in this offense of Kenny Payne's that has a lot of freedom, a lot of rat ball-esque type stuff to it. You guys remember us in elementary school with the rat ball offense. He has a 26% shot rate, 25% usage rate. Is playable in this spot at 6.3. Don't hate the idea of using him by any means. Pretty much off Mike James. He does come with guard forward eligibility and has scored 30-plus fantasy points in back-to-back games, which includes a matchup against Virginia Tech, which should have been a tougher Virginia Tech. But I don't want to get involved with too many Louisville guys. I think that's a losing proposition more often than not. JJ Traynor did not start in that game against DePaul, didn't play at all. I would consider him highly questionable at this moment. I don't even know, Kenny Payne's pressers are so, out there, man. He says something weird at almost every single presser. Didn't give a lot of detail on what the extent of Trainor's status or injury even is. So we'll see what happens there. He's pretty intriguing at 5.2 if he does play. But again, I don't want to get involved with too many of these Louisville guys. Tyler Johnson at 5.4. He, didn't have the tights. The whole presser didn't have the tights. Tyler should be with Trey White and Sky Clark the future of this program. That 3-guard trio should be really good. Tyler is not starting, but he has played some extended minutes over the last 5 games, which can, 30 against DePaul was great. 12 real points, 5 assists, 2 steals, a block. He's got some upsides. He's got talent. But minutes wise, what are we really going to get out of Tyler? Are we going to get 15 minutes? Are we going to get 30? Like, he's just such a prime transfer candidate as well here, depending on what happens with Kenny Payne. Payne calling him out in public. Like, this team is so dysfunctional. I really, it's tough to get behind any of them. But I do admit Sky Clark, Trey White, and Tyler Johnson as GPP looks all make sense. And if you wanted to use one for main, I do think I would lean towards Trey White, even at 6'6", which does feel a bit like an overpay, but he should do well here. Creighton versus UNLV. We have a Creighton team here, 13.5-point favorite, 152.5 total. As always with Creighton, and just kind of play I should just record myself whenever they're on the slate. Like, prices are either too high for me to comfortably play them in my main build, or they're right where they should be. Baylor Shireman at 9.4 is just astronomically high. He has been almost 10K for the last month of the season. Honestly, makes it really difficult. I don't think his price is ever going to drop. That's one of the ones where I feel like their pricing algorithm, they got somebody who's just manually keeping him up there. He has been really good in producing in blowouts or competitive games, but I just feel like 9.4 is just way too much of an ask. Even the 8.6 price on Trey Alexander, which he can pay off, and is a discount from where he was. You remember he got up to 10K there for a moment. Just a bit difficult for me to justify paying up for him. He's been great. He should be fine against this UNLV team. It is what they're calling a neutral court game, right? So it's fine. UNLV's defense is not great. They gave up a big number to FSU recently, a big number to Richmond recently, almost 80 to Loyola Marymount. So this is a spot where Creighton can succeed. It's just an opportunity cost there for me with Alexander and Shireman, especially with the myriad of mid-range guys that I do like. Kalkbrenner at 8.2 makes a lot of sense. Blowout game against Central, 17 minutes, had 22 fantasy points. They're favorites by double digits, but this isn't a big enough blowout where Kalkbrenner should lose significant playing time. UNLV's front court does struggle on the glass. They're a little undersized there. Caleb Boone, Luis Rodriguez, Jalen Hill. I do think Kalkbrenner theoretically should have a big game on the glass, but we know his rebounding. We can't trust his rebounding props. We can trust him in DFS for the most part, and he had back-to-back games of 12 rebounds against Okie State and Nebraska before going back to just 2 rebounds against Central, but of course that was the blowout. But that 8.2 price on Kalkbrenner, that's could go one of two ways there. I don't think there's any situation in where he just barely coasts into value. I think he either busts horribly or he breaks the slate. So you'll have a decision on your hands there if you want to use him. It is a matchup in which he should thrive, and that price of 8.2 has upside. I've been pretty critical of Stephen Ashworth since coming over from Utah State in the transfer. Don't hate him. I think he's fine. He's had some pretty good games there, especially when they needed to him against Oklahoma State. I don't know that we can really can trust him right now. The 5.8 price point, the price continues to drop, which is nice after he started up there at 8K to start the season. I'm fine with him as a last guy in, but he's not a priority option for me. I know Mason Miller, been trying to make him a thing lately. I've seen some ownership there. Does look to be healthy. Broke out against Central Michigan, but I don't know that we're trusting him just yet. Price jumps up to 4.6 after the 17.5 rebound performance. Just kind of a secondary GPP alt type play for me. Frederick King, give him some minutes. He's 4.2. High fantasy point per minute number. We're still waiting for Kalkbrenner to go to the next level, but King's just a play to have on your radar still. We know what he can do if he gets minutes. The UNLV side, they've got a ton of guys banged up or outright injury. Jalen Hill, who has been really good since coming over from Oklahoma, will be out for at least, it sounds like, another 4 to 5 weeks with a wrist injury, so we won't be seeing him. Keelan Boone still doesn't have I believe we're waiting on the waiver for him. His brother Caleb sitting there at 6K. We know the deal on Caleb. He has a foul issue that has plagued him throughout the course of his career, has a high fantasy point per minute number, and can fill it up quickly. Shot blocking extraordinaire, rebounds efficiently, and he's a very vicious inside scorer. But he does have a tendency to get into foul trouble. And again, I'm uncomfortable with this team in the front court having to deal with Ryan Kalkbrenner because they are undersized for what they're going to have to do and how they're going to have to guard him. Kalkbrenner also draws about 4.5 fouls per 40. Nobody else on Creighton is above 3.5. So this isn't a team that necessarily will get anyone on this UNLV squad into foul trouble, but Kalkbrenner would be a guy, especially if they look to get him the ball, could sit Caleb Boone down quickly. 5.4 fouls called per 40 on Caleb Boone throughout the course of his career at Oklahoma State. That number has been high. 5.5, 4.8, 4.3, 5.8. That's just the player that he is. Great offensive rebounder, good overall combined rebounding rate, top 25 block rate, top 250 steal rate, usage rate over 24%. You know the deal. Caleb Boone is a really good GPP look. Tough to ever use him in your main build. Off the bench, one of their primary six-man, Jackie Johnson, who has a 30.7% shot rate, shooting 52% from long range. He's just coming in there and jacking things up, especially with some additional minutes that have kind of come his way recently, and they've juggled their lineup a little bit. Played 27 minutes in a close game against Loyola because of the various injuries that they've dealt with. I do not mind him at 3.6. Ironically, played the most minutes he had played all season there against Marymount and had one of his lower fantasy outputs. But before that, he put up 23 and 23 fantasy points in back-to-back games. So 3.6 for Jackie Johnson. You can look there. Creighton's defense is got the chops to make him kind of a lame duck play. But if he's somebody that were to creep into the starting lineup, he would be great there. Or say that, we can expect 20 plus minutes and we might not be able to. He would be a good value in that regard. The youngster, the freshman, the everything for UNLV, especially this season, it seems, Didon Thomas, who's playing 86.4% of the minutes, the highest number on the team. That is a top 90 number. Comes in at 7.2. He's seen some struggles. He's still a freshman. He's still pretty raw, has a lot of developing to do, and does face a Creighton perimeter defense that could frustrate him to a degree. But he's been priced up almost 8K for most of this season. He's, like I said, playing all the minutes he can handle. Rates-wise, he has been solid. Has an assist rate of 31.3%, shooting 39% from long range, 21% usage rate. I do like Didon Thomas. I think he's playable at 7.2, probably more of a luxury than an actual priority because there is that downside there. Going up against what we deem upper tier competition, he hasn't had a ton of opportunity to do so. FSU, which he did have 28 fantasy points. Richmond, which he was awful against. So some mixed results there for Didon Thomas. We'll see how he plays out, but I don't mind him at 7.2 if you'd like to go there. Luis Rodriguez is just a middling play at 6.4. He's rather safe, not a lot of upside, and that's been the case throughout the course of his career dating back to Ole Miss. Aside from Jackie Johnson, Isaiah Cottrell, who played 24 minutes against Loyola Marymount, perhaps Cottrell could be a thing at that price, near 7-footer. They don't have, like I said, much height. Do they give Cottrell the start again? Probably. Didn't start against Akron, but he did start and play 24 minutes against Loyola. So I would expect him to probably get the start here. Very high foul rate, similar to Caleb Boone. I am worried about him in that regard. I think UNLV front court players are going to be in foul trouble majority of this game. All right, Utah State versus Santa Clara. This is a game. Utah State 3-point favorites. I do believe this one has overtime potential. 152.5 over under. What do we like? What does Utah State even have? They're coached by Montana State ex-Montana State coach Danny Sprinkle. Ryan Odom has gone on to VCU, took a couple of his players with him. Utah State basically got gutted. Come into this season with middling expectations. Suddenly, they have the 8th longest winning streak in the country, and they haven't lost since November 11th against Bradley in overtime. They're now 9-1. They haven't necessarily had the greatest non-con schedule. Wins over St. Louis, which is decent enough, and a win over Akron, which is typically one of the better MACtion teams. But they haven't played anyone particularly well. They're going to have a streak of WCC opponents, Santa Clara and San Francisco, this week on their schedule. And then we will see them go into the Mountain West Conference play after a game on December 22nd against East Tennessee State. This team revolves around Great Osabar, who played on Montana State the last couple of years under Sprinkle with Raekwon Battle. Didn't get the hype that Battle got, but man, his rates at Montana State last year were phenomenal, and it almost went undernoticed. So far this year, 30% usage rate. Last year, it was 28%. Combined rebounding rate of 31%, which is comparable to last year. His block rate has gone up to 7%, and he's drawing over 7 fouls per 40. Does have a way less foul rate so far this year. The first 2 years of his career, 6.2 fouls per 40. Right now, he's sitting at 3.1 fouls per 40. I do like him in this matchup against Santa Clara. He has guard forward eligibility, which we love. He shouldn't have guard eligibility at all, but he does. He's a little bit higher priced at 8.3, which maybe keeps some people away, but he's just phenomenal. He is definitely one of the higher priority plays in my pool for this slate. I really like the way that Great Osabar plays, and I think that people are kind of sleeping on him, and maybe if they're not hardcore mid-major watchers, then haven't had a chance to watch him play. Definitely take a look at this game. He's going to show you that Utah State, a lot of their success this year has been on his shoulders. The other player to look at, Darius Brown, who comes in at 7.4. He has been very consistent, playing big minutes for this Utah State team as well. Brown has way less usage than Osabar, but has found a way to be a fantasy relevant player nonetheless. And this is another guy that came over with Danny Sprinkle from Montana State after playing 4 seasons with Cal State and Northridge. This is actually, I believe, his 6th season due to the COVID year. So usage rate about 15.8%, not high, but he has an assist rate of 32.1%. He's shooting 37% from long range. And he just, like I said, does enough to contribute in all categories. His high assist rate and his facilitating skills on this team really makes him an intriguing option. Probably a little priced high for what we're normally going to get from him, but he does make sense in a GPP. And again, I think a mini stack of this game could be in order and could be a optimal build in the jam. Osabar is my guy, but Brown is certainly worth a shot there. The other starters, or at least the other relevant players for Utah State, the freshman Mason Falsev, Ian Martinez, you may remember him from Utah transferring over, and the 7-footer Isaac Johnson, who was at Oregon a couple of seasons ago, a Pac-12 high major pedigree. And they also bring off the bench Jackson Grant, who was with the Huskies at one time, Nigel Burris, who was a contributor for Idaho a season ago, and Max Ogbunkpalo, who spent a few seasons with USC, was at Wyoming last year, really couldn't get much of anything going for the Cowboys, and here he is, sitting there at 4.3. He does have a questionable tag. He's got a foot issue. They didn't need him in the last game, which was against Northwest Nazarene, non-D1. I believe he'll be back and playing in this game, so I'm not too worried about that if you wanted to use him. He's not a very high-end value anyways, 4.3. Like, we're probably realistically getting 18 to 20 minutes from him. He's okay, not great, but just fine. Isaac Johnson, who starts the 7-footer at 3.9. Fouls are a problem for him. He doesn't get a ton of minutes. He is a higher fantasy point per minute player, and I do think this 3.9 price makes a little bit of sense, at least in GPP standpoint, because he could put up 20 in 15 minutes, but it is a lean play to use in your main team or your single entry contest. He's a lower upside guy or lower floor guy overall, but he does come with some intrigue. Has a shot rate of 26%, usage rate over 20%, combined rebounding rate over 20%. He's actually knocking down 43% of his triples on 14 attempts. So 7-footer has some real versatility here. Obviously, like I said, coming into it, had some pedigree to play for Oregon. I think he does end up playing a big role for this team. Just needs some further development, some nourishment. Mason Falsev, a very intriguing younger prospect. He's 6'8", probably a slightly better play than Darius Brown. His overall usage and shot rate is much higher at 21%, knocking down 35% of his long-range jumpers, and has an assist rate of around 20%. Again, another secondary option, but he has a very solid high floor and is somebody at 6'8" that I think could find his way into your lineup as a last man in type. Absolutely. Ian Martinez was much more fun as a value play while he was at Utah, and of course spent a couple of seasons at Maryland. Rarely paid off even at like 3.5, but he is getting the opportunity to play more here. I don't think I could pay the 5.7 price tag for him, but he is chucking from long range, only shooting 27%, but over 20 attempts. He is getting consistent minutes as well. The Santa Clara side, it is, gone are the days of our PRA specialist and just, dude, just unbelievable. Brandon Podziemski, who's now tearing it up in the NBA. Santa Clara, kind of expected them to take a big step back. They are 7-3, have stumbled lately after starting fast. They do have a win over Oregon, did lose to Ohio State by a lot, lost to Cal by a double-digit margin, and then just got beat on the neutral court by New Mexico. So Herb Sendek's guys are kind of faltering here. It is a 77-73 projection on KenPom, Utah State to win by 4. Should be relatively close. Again, it's a 3-point spread. The Santa Clara team, they just have a lot of I guess, unproven players that have come in from different destinations, and it's taken a little bit more to get them acclimated. They were able to win against lesser tier opponents, but now playing, kind of upper crust guys or at least higher majors, they've kind of hit a wall. Adama Ball is a intriguing option. He starts Carlos Marshall, Francisco Cafaro, Christopher Tilley, and Johnny O'Neal. Ball is the guy that I think most people look to as the semi-alpha of this team. He's at a reasonable price at 6'1", playing consistent minutes. His overall rates are solid. Again, he spent a couple of years at Arizona as a role player. 23% shot rate, shooting 33% from long range on 45 attempts. He does have an assist rate pushing 20% as well, and he's shooting 58% on non-3-point field goals. 6'1's reasonable. Carlos Marshall, who has been earmarked as the alpha after Podziemski went to the NBA, he's had some pretty solid games. I don't think we get there at 6'5". He's much better as a secondary player. When having to carry the load, he's kind of struggled a bit, although he is shooting really well from long range at 45%. And he's rebounding at a pretty high level as well, too. 25% usage rate, 26% shot rate. So numbers wise, he makes sense, but I'm less comfortable with him than I would be with Adama Ball. Christopher Tilley, 25% usage rate, 25% shot rate. He's sitting there at 5'8". He is a decent enough GPP look in this game, not a priority, somebody whose minutes and usage will be all over the place from a game-to-game basis. Francisco Cafaro, transferring in from Virginia. We know what he can do. He can put up, him and Caden Shedrick together, they were like super sporadic, very foul prone, but when they could actually log minutes 20 plus, they were slate breaking capable players. And I think Cafaro could be a nice look in this matchup, but he's a very low end option overall. Just more of I think this game style sets up good for him. But it's hard to trust, right? And then Jalen Benjamin, who sits there at 4-2, a solid enough value to keep in our scopes. He has been starting majority of the season. He did come off the bench against New Mexico, played only 14 minutes. I would only like to use him if he were to go back into the starting lineup. If not starting, I don't think even at 4-2 I would have much interest. But as a starter 4-2, I do think he could get us 16 to 18 fantasy points. All right, next game, Washington State versus Nevada. Nevada, man, I got a lot of garbage from people trolling me about how they beat Washington and whoa, what's this all about? Steve Alford team, but don't look now. Nevada's 7-1. Granted, they haven't played a very great schedule. That Washington win is going to end up being their best win, at least right now. And then coming off a neutral court loss against Drake, in which Drake just completely throttled them 72-53. Our man Tucker DeVries, 25, 7, and 5, looked like MJ out there. This one is a 71-62 projection. I said Washington State, but I meant Weber State. Gotta give me a break here. I think we certainly want to look to Keenan Blackshear in this matchup. I know that we probably have a tendency to look at other teams when Nevada's on the slate. They're not a very inspiring team. Alford has some negative connotations around him. And typically Blackshear, at least the last season and a half, has been priced really, really high. 8K is a big opportunity cost here for Blackshear. But the nice thing is, even in games in which he has slow starts, and he does this quite a lot, he has the chops to rock the second half in a like put up 30 plus fantasy points in one half type of player. He is very important to the offense and overall makeup of this team. He's got strong rates across the board in all categories. Top 40 assist rate especially sticks out. The only thing he can't do is shoot threes. He doesn't attempt them, and he's always been a very low-end three-point shooter throughout the course of his career. He's only taken 4 so far this year, which is kind of strange, but he's mainly going to get it done inside the arc, and he's going to set the table for others. I do admit 8K is a little bit of a tough price, but as far as hammers go, he's probably the most intriguing for me overall. We know the deal on Jared Lucas. 6'7" is too high for him. He's just very shot reliant. You saw he put up a 40 against Portland recently, but if his shot's not falling, he's really not going to make value, and 6'7" is just way too high to use. Trey Coleman at 6'5", same kind of thing. He is less of a scorer than Lucas and heavier on the peripherals. If we could put Coleman with Lucas together into one package, that would be one hell of a DFS player. Really low-end option on him as well. Nick Davidson at 6'4". Don't have a lot of love for him at that price. KJ Himes, very inconsistent. The kid Jazz Gardner at 4'1", who has seen an erratic amount of minutes. Like, it only comes down to Keenan Blackshear. There's not a lot else to like on this Nevada team, honestly, unless you go down to 4K Hunter McIntosh, who I do think has viability there, but will have to knock down his shots to be optimal even at 4K. So it's just a decision if you want to pay for Blackshear or not. And I don't think he's a priority by any means, at least to me. Nevada is 10-point favorites, and the total of the game is only 133.5. So, 30, 35, 40 points lower than a lot of the other games that we've already talked about. Nevada does have a top 50 defense in terms of efficiency. They're playing at the 118th tempo. Weber State, 350th in tempo, slow game. Defensively, they're 95th in efficiency there. So we're looking at a slower paced, probably a lot of turnovers. Just a game that doesn't need to be a priority for us. So I think Blackshear falls by the wayside, but he is somebody that could still pan out here. And if it does get to be an ugly game, Blackshear will just be racking up rebounds, steals, and those peripheral categories. When they need a bucket and Lucas is cold, they do go to Blackshear. Weber State, 8.5K, Dylan Jones, a decision point to be sure. He has been fantastic. He's playing 93.9% of the minutes, 7th highest in the country. We went through a bad experience tonight with Oral Roberts and Isaac McBride, who was playing, some of the most minutes in all the country, and he played the entire game again. But Texas Tech did a nice job negating him. He shot poorly, and it didn't work out. Might that happen with somebody like Dillon Jones against Nevada in an ugly game environment? Certainly. Jones is a really good option overall because we know he's going to do everything for this team. 31% usage rate, 27% shot rate. He has the number one defensive rebounding rate in the country, 28.3% assist rate. So you have a kind of combo wing type player here who is facilitating, scoring for himself, setting the table, doing everything. Draws 6 fouls per 40, shoots 31% from long range. Really like what Dillon Jones brings to the table, has a safe floor. How much upside will he really have at 8-5 against Nevada? That remains to be seen. He's had 4 different games with double-digit rebounds. He is a very solid look. Weber State's non-con schedule has not had a lot on it. They did beat St. Mary's away and an overtime win on a neutral court against Yale, but a bad loss against Utah Valley and a probably a questionable loss to Gardner-Webb, a respectable loss to a good Colgate team. So it's hard to gauge just how good this Weber State team actually is. The game against St. Mary's, Dillon Jones played all 40 minutes, 10 rebounds, 29 points, and a steal. I am not afraid to use him in any matchup when he does that against the St. Mary's team that, granted, is struggling and is not who we thought they were. So if you want to pay up for somebody today, Dillon Jones is a very good option to do so. The other rotational DFS viable players, Dyson Keeler, Steve Verplanken, KJ Cunningham, and Alex Tu. Blaze Threat off the bench is one of their primary 6 men. Just go down the price list here. 2 at 4.7 does give you a value at forward. Pretty high fantasy point per minute type of player, but more of a middling value. Could go either way with him. I do think he produces here and pays off that 4.7 price tag, but there's definitely downside. He does have foul issues, so you're always going to have to look out for that until college basketball goes to 6 fouls, which probably isn't going to happen anytime soon, although they do toy with that stuff in the NIT. Dyson Keeler at 5.2 for a few hundred more. I do like him to a degree. He had a big game last time out. He is a unproven player for the most part, but his rates have been solid. He's contributing at a more consistent rate. He's playing higher minutes, plays solid defense. He started every single game, and he's only had one game in which he didn't log at least 22 minutes. So we do have a guy here at 5.2 with forward eligibility that makes some sense, but he, in the pecking order, he's certainly further down. Verplanken at 5.9, the main table setter for this team. Dillon Jones, again, does everything, so he's facilitating the offense, even kind of doing a Derek Walker-esque type role. Verplanken does make a little bit of sense at 5'9". He offers some safety there. He's going to take a ton of shots. I think the Nevada defense gives him a little bit of problems, but from a GPP's perspective, he's taken a ton of shots. His shot rate has ballooned up to 24%. In 4 of his last 5 games, he's taken at least 10 shots, and he's just jacking up threes with reckless abandon. 75% of his shots have been from long range. So Verplanken is definitely in play as well. All right, last game on the slate, we have San Francisco Dons. The Dons, they've been on the slate so much lately. I feel like they're becoming an adoptive team for us. And the Seattle U, not to be confused with the Washington Huskies, but Seattle, who does have a local kid by the name of Cam Tyson, who is fantastic. We'll talk about him here in a moment. What's up, Don? Good to see you. Thanks for continuing to support the show. Any game I really like tomorrow from my betting perspective? I know that's what you're asking about. We're making great time tonight, so I will bring that up and look at a few lines that I am looking at here. Yes. All right, so San Francisco, at this point, you know what to do. It's you either decide to play Jonathan Mogbo or you probably fade this team. I know Marcus Williams had a massive second half yesterday against New Orleans. It's crazy how fast this team is back on the slate. 11 of 21. New Orleans made, they were getting their doors blown off in the first half, and they started, Jordan Johnson started making all of his shots. They made this big second half push, and all of a sudden Marcus Williams had to start scoring. He ends up with 28 real points, 38 fantasy points, makes his price $8K. I am not probably going to be using Marcus Williams at $8K, but he is really the only other Dons player that you can really justify in your main lineup. Mike Shavajamps, who had a good early season start for this team, he's kind of faded lately. He's struggling with his shot. He doesn't do a lot else in terms of peripherals. So I don't think you can use him. We know the deal on Newberry, Cunin, Toto, Rich. They're all role players who generally don't have spike games. I know Toto had 19 yesterday, but that's really not a consistent look for him. I wouldn't be anywhere near him, even at 3.8 in my main lineup. And then you have the kid, Ryan Beasley, who's sitting there at 4.7. Makes a lot of sense as well, playing extended minutes, but against the last game that he played in ASU, lesser minutes, and he did sit out for the last couple of games. So really it's Williams or Mogbo, and I think it's Mogbo at this point. All right. This sickness around this house needs to stop. I'm going to have to go soon. It sounds like one of the kids is not doing well up there. So Mogbo is priced up to 9.8. Obviously, continues to go higher and higher and higher. We are getting to a point with him where we can jump off. I mean, he's consistently putting up 40-plus fantasy points. Their opportunity cost is heavy, but his peripherals are just so safe, right? Like rebounding rates high, assist rates high. He's getting stocks. It's mainly the scoring that's taken a dump the last couple of games, but he had 4 real points against Vanderbilt, still hit 36 fantasy, 10 real points against New Orleans, hits 42 fantasy. So I like Mogbo. You're not going to be able to play him in your main next to Dylan Jones. That's going to be difficult unless you're really super punting, but there are some GPP lineups out there that could theoretically play Osabor, Jones, and Mogbo and be really, really good if you're willing to punt out 3 different spots. Yeah. So it's a decision point if you can get there. I don't know if you will. Seattle, my man Cam Tyson. Now he's been around. He has, coming out of high school, he was a highly rated recruit. Ended up signing with the Houston Cougars. Or ended up signing with Idaho, but he transferred into Houston because he was way better than that. Should have been a high major player. Couldn't get things going for Houston. Decides to go to Seattle the last couple of years. I know the Huskies were in on him. He's from a town called Bothell, which isn't that far from my hometown, actually. Really, really awesome and intriguing scorer. I think that he makes a ton of sense in this matchup against San Francisco. San Francisco, after giving up that huge second half to Jordy Johnson from New Orleans, their defense than the Dons is really good under new coach Chris Gerlofson. Top 30 in defensive efficiency. But when you go into individual games and see what they're actually giving up and who's doing the damage, guards have done really well against them. Max Rice of Boise State has struggled all season long. He had 15 actual points against them. Tyson DeGenhart, 17-3. Chibuzo Agbo, 15 points, only hit 1 3. I know he's known as a 3-point shooter, but he scored easily against them as well. Again, Jordy Johnson had a stupid second half, 28 real points yesterday after struggling in the first. Arizona State, which is a game that I'm shocked they lost. They shouldn't have lost to them. Frankie Collins had a big one, 21 real points. Jose Perez had 12, 5, and 2. So we're seeing a individual DVP spot here, even though the Dons' overall team defense is very solid. So we can absolutely look at Cam Tyson, and I do feel confidently that at 7.3, he won't be a very highly owned option, especially if people do try to jam in Osabor, Jones, or Mogbo. He's playing a ton of minutes. He's taking a ton of shots. I don't think we need to, in the past, we've had to worry against Tyson against semi upper tier teams or high level mid majors, which I do believe San Francisco is. But I'm not that worried about him. 32.4% shot rate, making 38% of his long range jumpers, playing an absolute ton of minutes. Now he does have people talking about him missing the non D1 game against Northwest. I'm not worried about that. I do not think that is going to be an issue. I just think that's simply an instance of not needing him. In the past, Seattle has sat important starters against non D1 opponents before. If he doesn't start, we'll have that being one of the last games. We'll have to monitor it. If he were to not start, obviously you can't use him, but I would be very shocked if he didn't play and play 38 minutes. 38 to 40 minutes, honestly. So I'm not really too worried about that, even though that's going to be something that I'm sure comes up and people look at. You do have Alex Schumacher here at 5'8". As far as rates go, Schumacher's got some really, really strong efficiency numbers here in his second year with the team. 30% usage rate, 27.8% shot rate, cannot make a three to save his life, 12%, 3 of 25. Last year, he was 28 for 112, which is 25%. That's one area of his game he's needing to work on. But he does have a 40.4% assist rate. He is initiating the offense, running it well. This is a kid in Schumacher who deserves main team consideration at 5'8". If you're not comfortable with Tyson, or God forbid he doesn't play, and I'm wrong about that, Schumacher is going to have to be somebody at 5'8" that you just run. But you look at and see, it proves to our point. He played 12 minutes in the non-D1 game. They didn't play their relevant guys very long. They didn't need to. I'm not worried about Tyson not playing. Look for Schumacher to get back to his 35 minutes a game role as well. He makes a lot of sense. He's going to be an upper tier priority play for me in all formats, most definitely. Other starters on the Seattle U team that we can consider: Brennan Chatfield, Kobe Williamson, and Vaja Panza. They do play Seiji Riley and Paris Dawson off the bench. Chatfield is somebody that is usable, has a 25.3% shot rate, does come in at 6'5", a little lean, but he has been one of the more consistent options. If you wipe away the last game in which he only played 13 minutes in the blowout, he has scored over 20 fantasy points in all but one contest this season. So certainly a consistent look there for Chatfield. Everybody else on the team, mainly secondary role players. Kobe Williamson at 5'5", had a big game. He was the one that got to play as a starter the most minutes in the blowout game, and he put up a fairly high number, but he did have 4 steals. He's kind of in the starting group, the fifth Beatle, if you will. Did have a huge game against Idaho back in the end of November, in which he scored 28 real points. He has a extremely high steal rate, a very high defensive rebounding rate, and he's shooting 44% from long range. So I do think there's merit to using Kobe Williamson there at 5'5". He fouled out the game before that in 10 minutes. So when you look at that and see the oh my God, why did he only play 10 minutes? That's the reason why he got a little too handsy. He does reach a lot. I've watched a ton of Seattle U games over the years, and he is somebody on the defensive end that will get called for ticky-tack fouls. But he can get hot. He can get to the rack. He can draw fouls. He's not a big-time three-point shooter, so it's impressive, especially when you look at some of his higher performance games. He hasn't really relied on the three too much. The Idaho game was his best. He shot 5 of 7 from long range. So several playable options here for Seattle. I think it would go Schumacher as the number 1, Cam Tyson number 2, Kobe Williamson number 3, with obviously Tyson being quite spendy. But I'm looking to get exposure to that Seattle team in a myriad of ways. All right, and that is the slate. So what do we want to do for a core? What do we want to do? There's a lot of fantasy goodness later in the slate, and I want to definitely gear a lot of my exposure towards that group. I think as far as the pay-ups go, I like Dylan Jones. I like Mogbo. I think Mogbo is going to probably be the sacrificial lamb this time. We've been really, really riding with him, but there's just too many mid-range options that I don't want to miss out on by jamming Mogbo. I am going to do my best to play Osabor with Dylan Jones, though. And core play number one is great. Osabor at 8-3 gives us that guard forward eligibility, a lot of flexibility there for me. I'm all over him. Second core play right now is the sub 6K option and Alex Shoemaker. Expecting big minutes from him. I think, we're probably going to get a 5 or 6X number from him, possibly even a overtime potential there between Seattle U and San Fran. But I don't know. He just seems way too cheap. I think we got to just roll him and hope for the best. And then the third member of the core, assuming that nothing's changed and Darian Ford continues to start at 5K against Louisville, like I'm just plugging Darian Ford in. I think he's a great option there. Things to monitor or things to be aware of. Additionally, I like UTSA. I want exposure there in my main. Make a decision on Drew Pember against upper tier competition. Do we want Trey Donaldson? I still like him. Josh Hubbard, still like him. And then monitoring the Little Rock group there. If KK Robinson were to return and start at 3K, he would be an obvious no-brainer lock and load. But it does sound like he's still going to be out. All right, getting over to PrizePicks real quick. Do they have anything up? Okay, they do. They didn't have anything up right beforehand. Let's see what our props are looking like here. My man Jackson Robinson going up against Denver. I like his PRA number of 20.5, so I will be hitting the over 20.5. It was 19.5 the other day, and he missed it. But going up against Denver, I like him to get back to the right side of that. So over 20.5 PRA for my guy. There are some solid props for Utah State. It might seem a little high, but Great Osabor is going to have a big game. Over 17.5 points. Like I'm predicting a 20-10 type game for Great. I'm a big fan of his, and I think he comes to play here in this matchup. And then one other prop. We're not touching Kalkbrenner rebounds, by the way. I was strongly considering it, but no. Trey White over 13.5 real points. Those are our top PrizePicks options. As far as bets go, there is a game here that between UAB and Alabama A&M. Like I just talked about UAB a little bit, even though they're on the slate. They're just so untrustworthy right now under Andy Kennedy, and defensively they're horrible. They're 11.5 point favorites against Alabama A&M, and Alabama A&M is not a good team. They play out of the SWAC. Their defense, offense, everything is horrible. They play at an extremely fast pace. They've won one game, and it was an overtime game over Tennessee State, in which they won late. I don't love them by any means, but this is a play against UAB, not a play really for Alabama A&M, which sound like something Mike Randall would say on his betting show. Ken Palm has it 81-71 as 10 points. UAB just suffered a blowout loss to Arkansas State, a puzzling loss to Southern Miss, and then they got their doors blown off by a McNeese State team that is coached by Will Wade, the American Gangster, former LSU coach. But it's important to note, Will Wade was suspended for that game in the first 10, and they still absolutely detonated. And it's puzzling because they beat Maryland. They lost just barely to Clemson on the neutral court. And they have good quality wins over Middle Tennessee and Furman. But it's hard to trust this UAB team. And going on the road is always a tough proposition, even against a lower tier SWAC team. Being 11.5 point favorites on the road, I don't know. I don't think so. So I'll take Alabama A&M plus 11.5. More a play against UAB than it is for Alabama A&M. It's one of those things I just want to exploit. We had the Coppin State Georgetown game today, which got to was 19.5 last night, which I liked it, plus 19.5. It got to plus 21, and Georgetown ends up winning 71-54 because we're asking a team like Georgetown, they were missing players too, to win a game by 20 plus, even against a bad, quote unquote, bad Coppin State team. Georgetown's not been great, and certain teams like that, just they're not going to win games by 20. So that one, I was on Coppin State side, it worked. I think the Alabama A&M side will work as well. So that's one that I'm looking at. McNeese State plays Southern Mississippi. I love this McNeese State team. They're going to be so good now that Will Wade's coaching. They're playing Southern Miss. They're -6.5. I'm all over McNeese State. They've come out to an 8-2 start on the season. Now that the 10-game suspension is over for Will Wade, home game against a Southern Miss team. Southern Miss, they've got some good dudes on this team. Victor Hart, Austin Crawley, Victor Uwakor, who's a former Oklahoma player. They do have some transfers that ended up not getting a waiver, so they won't play this season. But of course, Andre Curbelo is going to be on this team eventually. But this McNeese State team is a tournament squad, and I think they clear 10+ against Southern Mississippi. So I'll take them -6.5 as well. Alabama A&M +11.5. Those are two bets that I'm solidly on. We'll see what Mike Randall has to say tomorrow on his betting show, but those are two that I'm pretty confident in. All right, that'll do it. I have duty calls as the parents. Got to go take care of some sick kids, even though it's almost damn midnight. Going to be an awful day at work tomorrow, but there will be an article in the early afternoon kind of recapping and tying off into a nice bow what I've said. Then we'll be off tomorrow from the Super Show, back Thursday night to cover the Saturday slate of games for CFB Bowl games. Then the CBB version of the show will be back Friday night. Thank you for your continued support. I appreciate it. Let's get those green screens. Let's win those bets, and let's dominate on a predominantly mid-major slate. This is where our edge is. Appreciate it. Take care. See you guys later.